April 1945, northern Italy was falling apart. Roads were choked with retreating German soldiers and desperate civilians flooding north. Allied forces were pushing through the country at speed. The fascist regime that had ruled Italy for over 2 decades was collapsing, not slowly, not gracefully, but all at once, like a building with no foundation left. And somewhere inside that chaos, buried in the back of a German military truck, sat the man who had built that regime. Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, the leader, the man who had once commanded the absolute loyalty of 40 million Italians, was hiding under a German military overcoat with a helmet pulled low over his face, praying that nobody would recognize him. They did. And what happened in the 48 hours that followed became one of the most disturbing endings in the history of modern warfare. Mussolini was born on July 29, 1883, in Predappio, a small village in northern Italy. His father was a blacksmith. His mother was a school teacher. From childhood, he was violent, brilliant, and completely ungovernable. He was expelled from a Catholic boarding school after stabbing a classmate with a penknife, but he could write. And when he stood in front of a crowd and opened his mouth, people stopped breathing. That combination, raw violence and extraordinary charisma, was what made him so dangerous. By 1919, he had built a movement. His followers, the Blackshirts, did not debate their opponents. They burned their offices, dragged people out of their homes at night, and beat them in the streets. By October 1922, he had organized a march on Rome demanding power. The king had the army to stop him. He never gave the order. Mussolini became prime minister. Within 3 years, Italian democracy was dead. Political parties were banned, the press was controlled, a secret police force was built, and Mussolini gave himself a title that said everything: Il Duce, the leader. For 20 years, no one in Italy openly challenged him, but then he made the mistake that every man who believes he is untouchable eventually makes. He overreached. He invaded Ethiopia and used poison gas on civilians. He signed the Pact of Steel with Adolf Hitler, locking Italy into a full military alliance with Nazi Germany, and on June 10, 1940, convinced the war would be short and the rewards enormous, he declared war on Britain and France. Italy's military was destroyed in Greece, crushed in North Africa, annihilated in Russia. By July 1943, Allied forces had landed in Sicily. 2 weeks later, his own fascist Grand Council voted against him. The king had him arrested as he left the palace. The man who had declared himself untouchable was finished. Hitler rescued him in September 1943. German paratroopers landed gliders on a mountain in the Apennines and pulled him out of captivity. But the regime Hitler handed back to him was hollow. No real army, no real authority. Just a face on a dying government in northern Italy while the war collapsed around it. By April 1945, Mussolini fled Milan. He put on a German military coat. He climbed into a German convoy heading north along Lake Como toward the Swiss border. He kept his head down and said nothing. For a few hours, it almost worked. Then on the morning of April 27th, the convoy reached the small town of Dongo, where communist partisans had set up a roadblock. They stopped every vehicle. They pulled Italian fascists out one by one. One partisan noticed a heavy-set man sitting silently in the back of a truck, pale, hollow-eyed, wearing a German coat that was clearly too large for him. They pulled him out, removed the helmet. Mussolini said nothing. He stared at the ground like a man who already knew how this would end. He was taken to a farmhouse in the village of Bonzanigo. His mistress, Clara Petacci, refused to leave his side. She stayed with him through the night. It was the last night of his life. The orders that arrived the next morning from the National Liberation Committee in Milan were simple and absolute. No trial, no prison, no negotiations. A partisan commander, named Walter Audisio, known as Colonel Valerio, drove to the farmhouse and told Mussolini he had come to rescue him. Mussolini believed it. He got into the car without hesitation. The car stopped a few miles away at a quiet road in the village of Giulino di Mezzegra. Audisio ordered Mussolini and Petacci out. They stood in front of a stone wall. No crowd. No ceremony. Just a wall and a gun pointed at the man who had ruled Italy for 23 years. Mussolini looked at the weapon. According to every witness present, he opened his coat and said, "Shoot me in the chest." At exactly 4:10 p.m. on April T4 Race 28, 1945, Audisio raised his submachine gun and fired. Mussolini was hit multiple times and fell. Clara Petacci lunged toward him screaming. She was shot dead before she reached him. It was over in seconds, but the story did not end there. The bodies were driven to Milan, to a public square called Piazzale Loreto. That location was chosen deliberately. Less than a year earlier, in August 1944, Mussolini's regime had executed 15 resistance fighters in that exact square and left their bodies on the ground in the summer heat for hours as a warning. Now, it was his turn. When the truck arrived in the early hours of April 29th, thousands of people were already waiting. The bodies were thrown onto the ground. The crowd surged forward. People kicked them, spat on them, fired more bullets into them. Women who had lost their sons in Mussolini's wars pushed through the crowd just to reach his body. Then the partisans found a metal beam at a nearby gas station. Using ropes and meat hooks, they strung up the bodies of Mussolini, Petacci, and 4 other fascists upside down for the entire city of Milan to see. The photograph went around the world. Winston Churchill later said that while the execution was justified, the public display of the body disturbed him deeply. But for the people standing in that square, people who had lived under 20 years of fear, repression, and war, it was not a spectacle. It was the end of something that had felt like it would never end. Mussolini's remains were eventually buried in his hometown of Predappio, in a tomb that still stands today. It still gets visitors. Some come out of curiosity, others still admire him. They all stand over the grave of a man who was absolutely certain that history would crown him as a conqueror. Instead, the last image the world remembers of Benito Mussolini is a body hanging upside down from a gas station beam, while the people he once ruled stood below and cheered. That is how Il Duce ended. Not with glory, not with an empire, with a rope, and a crowd that had finally stopped being afraid. Every dictator in history believed at some point that they were beyond accountability. So here is the question worth sitting with. Is the story of Mussolini a warning about one man, or is it a warning about what happens when ordinary people stay silent for too long? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this video made you see the end of World War II differently, subscribe. Now, because the next story we are covering is even darker, and it starts in a way you will not expect.